Welcome to Go Green Radio, everybody. So glad that you could join us today. We've got a very important topic. Back in January of 2025, we experienced one of the worst climate disasters of our time. The LA wildfires were horrifying for all of us to watch, but even more so for those who had to live through it. And today, we're going to be talking about a really important rebuilding guide that the U.S. Green Building Council California has put together with support from Arup. The California Wildfire Rebuilding Guide is comprehensive. It's one of the most amazing resources I've ever seen in this age of climate change. And our guests today are Heather Rosenberg. She leads Arup's resilience planning and policy practice in the Americas. And we also have Becky Feldman. She is the USGBC California Chief of Staff, and I'm really excited to have them on to talk about this new California Wildfire Rebuilding Guide. Heather, let's go to you first. I'm really looking forward to talking with you. I'd love to begin by having you share with our listeners how this guide came together. Who was involved, and how did your work together really produce this amazing and best possible guide?
Yeah, thank you so much for asking and thanks for having us and talking about this important issue. Um, as you said, I lead our resilience practice in Los Angeles, and when we talk about resilience, we talk a lot about natural disasters, and we get involved after and before a lot of disasters. But when it happens in our hometown in LA, when it's impacting our friends and our families, um, and so many of our colleagues, then it's a whole other level for us. And we really wanted to think about how do we come together with the community and leverage the technical resources that we have within Arup, which is a major global engineering practice, and how do we tap into the expertise that we have to try and help out. And so we reached out to the USGBC California. We've worked with them before post-fire, and have been so impressed by all the leadership that they've been providing in the community over the years. And so it was just a natural fit to say, well, we're thinking about putting together some technical guidance. They said, we're thinking about it too. Let's work together. And we went from there.
And I understand, Heather, that you guys had an advisory group as well that was comprised of a variety of stakeholder groups. Can you tell us just a little bit about that and who was on that advisory group?
Yeah, actually, I can have Becky talk about it more because it's a standing group of USGBC California, a bunch of volunteers and really amazing experts from the state, from the city, landscape architects and fire practitioners and all kinds of folks. So let's have Becky talk a little bit about that group.
Will do. And Becky, before we have you answer that question, I just want to welcome you to the show. I'm so glad that you're with us. And I understand that this situation is very personal for you. And before we go into the question that I asked Heather, tell us how your experience with the LA wildfires shaped your work on this guide.
Yeah, thanks, Jill, and thanks for having us on. It's really important to talk about the guide and this situation and how we all recover and rebuild together because it really is going to take all of us. As you said, I'm approaching this from both a professional and a personal lens. I lived in the Palisades.
Mm.
I was in the office in downtown LA when the fire broke out. My husband, who is an LA County firefighter, was near our neighborhood in the Palisades and noticed the smoke almost immediately as his, smoke sensors went off
Hmm.
from many, many years of doing this. And he said, I think this is going to be really bad. I think you should come home. So I went home. I quickly grabbed some things, evacuated my 4-year-old daughter and our dog. And he stayed to fight the fires in our neighborhood, which was Tahitian Terrace Mobile Home Park, located right on PCH in Temescal, a place where we said, okay, this is a bad fire, but it couldn't get here. It would have to burn through billions of dollars of real estate to get to the ocean and the mobile home park where we lived. And within just a few hours, it had done just that. So
Oh.
I am doing this as a professional in the green building space and also as a homeowner who's having to go through this really challenging, really overwhelming, and really new process for so
Mhm.
many of us. There's so many people affected by this fire who never thought about rebuilding their homes at all, let alone
Mhm.
in such a dramatic and traumatic fashion. So, we're here to provide information and education to both those homeowners, but also all the building professionals that we're going to need to work together to rebuild our communities, to educate them on the changes they can make, the new knowledge that they can have to make sure that they're rebuilding more resiliently, that we're building structures that have the future in mind. We're not rebuilding necessarily exactly what we had. We're
Mhm.
building something that's going to last longer for all of us so we can reclaim these communities that we really loved so deeply. So yes, this touches me from two worlds, so I have this really unique perspective on what we're
Mhm.
doing here.
You sure do. And I'd love for you to tell us about this volunteer group that was a part of building this guide. Who were some of the players involved?
Sure. Yeah. So our organization, USGBC California, started doing wildfire response after the Woolsey and Thomas fires in 2018. I didn't join the organization until 2020, so this was a little before my time, but we pulled together an advisory group, and this is folks from state, city, county level. So people that were in the fire department and CAL FIRE in the Santa Monica Mountain Conservation District, and different home builders and wildfire experts and landscape architects and people that really knew a lot about defensible space and were writing these new codes for California. And we pulled together this advisory group and we said, how can we help in the wake of these disasters? And we built a curriculum around wildfire defense. So, wildfire defense for contractors and for landscape professionals. And those are courses that we began running after those fires that we still run, that we have taken that group together to advise on getting that curriculum together and how we need to update it. Because as we saw from these most recent fires, these climate disasters are changing. This is a
Mhm.
fire, and my husband talks about it all the time, and can go into it. And I just have my firefighter hearsay knowledge, but this is unlike any fire that he had ever seen in his 15 years as a firefighter and any of the fires that his colleagues had seen. He fought the Woolsey fire. He was in Broad Beach and they protected a whole neighborhood because they sat there and embers came and they
Mhm.
extinguished them. This was walls of fire blowing horizontally through
Wow.
neighborhoods, and it was something different. So we need to adapt our knowledge to meet the times. We need to adapt our knowledge to meet the new risks that are coming our way. And so this group of expert really helps us do that. And we pulled them in for this project, and we said, we're doing this rebuilding guide. We need all of these well-rounded opinions. So we held meetings, we had a working group, we had people reviewing it on a constant basis, and people were so generous with their time and their expertise to make sure that this was a really well-rounded resource that took all these perspectives into consideration. And then the other thing I'll say is it's just like the situation that we're recovering from, just like future climate disasters, it is always developing. We are going to do a version 2. We are going to add new things. We are taking
Mhm.
into account that this situation is still in motion.
Well, and it's such a blessing to the state of California that USGBC California exists because when you were still USGBC LA, we had the Camp Fire in 2018 up in Northern California, and it destroyed an entire city in just a few hours, Paradise, the city of Paradise. And, they've been struggling with rebuilding since then. And so, it's just you're in the right place at the right time to give the guidance that is just so sorely needed. I want to open it up to you guys both, Heather and Becky, to walk us through some of the key concepts that are involved in the guide.
Um, Maybe I'll take a first step and sort of just talk through what we were trying to do here, because there's so much knowledge that's already out there. There's so much knowledge that is developing as these fires look really different, as Becky was describing, that are so harrowing. This was really hurricane force winds and conditions we've not really seen before. And I was up in Paradise following those
Mm-hmm.
fires and following the campfire and also following Woolsey and have been thinking about this a lot. But even, with all of the knowledge that we have, there's still so much that we're all learning.
Mm-hmm.
And so we tried to develop a guide that could be flexible and adaptable, that was targeted towards community members who had lost their home, to help them work with their designers and their architects to really understand what design decisions were most important, if they decided to rebuild. And so it goes through some high level considerations, some understanding of how does fire even move, and what are the kinds of things that make a home fire resistant. And then we really try and link that with the co-benefits of which ones of those things are less expensive, which ones actually could lead to energy or cost savings, which of those make the home safer in general, which are more sustainable and really linking to the core mission of USGBC, and really thinking about the local context where we also have earthquakes and some of those other things. We thought about decarbonization. We thought about all of these different sort of big issues and wove those in, thinking about where do you put your building on the site, how do you design the outside, the inside, the building systems, what can you do kind of that might be more innovative with natural materials and things like that, and really finally focusing on what can be done at scale with the community. Community really is the fundamental building block of resilience, and so that section is really near and dear to my heart of how do we help communities work together uh, to really build back better.
Mm-hmm. And I do want to dive more deeply into that community section in a little bit. I want to make sure that all of our listeners have a chance to take a look at the guide. And if you want to check out the link to that, let me give that to you real quick. It's actually in the show description. I've linked it right there so that you can take a look at it if you look in the show description. I will also be putting it out on social media as we promote the archived version of this live broadcast. So it really is worth taking a look, even if you are not rebuilding right now. If you're going to be doing some refurbishing of your home and you want to make it fire safe, this guide is for you. We're going to take a quick commercial break, but when we come back, we have much more with Becky and Heather. So don't go away, folks. There's more Go Green Radio right after this. Welcome back to Go Green Radio, everybody. So glad that you could be with us. Very, very important topic today. We're talking about a brand new guide that's been put out by the U.S. Green Building Council, California. It's the California Wildfire Rebuilding Guide. And I really want to say this and kind of underscore that this is not just for folks who experienced these awful fires down in LA in January of 2025. This is also for folks who live in California or live in other parts of the country. And now we're seeing wildfires, all over the place, maybe in areas that have never experienced the level of wildfires that they are now. This guide, which is linked in the show description of this episode of Go Green Radio, can help you make your home more fire, I'm not going to say proof, but fire ready. There's so many great points that are made in this guide and key concepts that even if you haven't lost your home, but you're looking to make it more hardened against these kinds of disasters, this guide is for you. So, Becky, I want to go back to you. I want to dig in more deeply to some of these key concepts in the guide.
Sure. Yeah. And I think it's important what you said. This guide really is for everyone. And one of the most important points is making it accessible. So Heather and her team at Arup, Brittany and Mackenzie and Heather and the rest of them are such amazing technical experts. And working with them on this project was incredible and learning from them. And then making it really digestible for someone like me or someone like my neighbor who I'm a green building professional, but I wasn't thinking about hardening my home against fire. And my neighbors are, various professionals and a lot of retirees. So they really weren't thinking about these concepts. So how could we break them down into really digestible chunks of information that people could take and really use and were actionable? So we broke it into sections and we explained topics up front, like Heather said previously. And I would say the most important things are use non-combustible materials. The guide tells you exactly what that means, but it's things that don't catch on fire easily. Cement, for example, cement doesn't catch on fire, stone doesn't catch on fire, brick, but wood, as we all know, does, and some of these composite materials that we use. So use non-combustible materials and have a tight building envelope so embers are less likely to get into the home, into the roofing system, and then ignite from there. So it's broken up into digestible sections, and also it's very graphic. So you're seeing pictures of these items and you're saying, use this roofing material for these reasons, not this. And it goes into the co-benefits. And so I'm going to let our technical expert, Heather, take on exactly what that means and give you some material switches or some systems that you can use within your home that would harden it and for the rebuilding process that are going to make it more resilient moving forward.
Thanks, Becky. Yeah, I'll pick that up there. The first thing to think about that is very specific to rebuilding from fire. If you're thinking about a home that was, you're basically starting from scratch, then there are some questions that come into play that probably aren't options if you're looking at a retrofit, but you can think about where the house goes on the property, and often people are rebuilding on existing footprints, but thinking about keeping the building itself far from the property edge, the relationship of different buildings on the property to each other, so that you can maintain this concept of defensible space, so that fire isn't moving from one property to the next. And as you're doing that, then we're starting to think about where in the property you might do that. There's some guidance around, a lot of these properties are hilly, especially in the Palisades, and where, what additional issues you might think about if you're on a slope or other things like that. Those are really important considerations before you even get started with building. And once you're starting thinking about materials, so instead of a wood roof, which you really can't do anyway in terms of code, thinking about, whether that's asphalt shingles or metal or clay tile roof, but also the shape of the roof matters, and not creating kind of valleys in the roof where embers can accumulate. And that was actually something for me as I started to look around my property, really this concept of where would embers accumulate and where might debris accumulate that an ember could fall into, so that basically you have on your property somewhere little piles of kindling or leaves and things like that that could easily catch fire. And I just looking at, I live about 4 miles south of the Eaton fire as the crow flies.
Mm.
So out of the fire zone, but definitely feeling a lot of the smoke impacts. Not nearly as bad as those in and around the burn scar, but enough to really reevaluate
Hmm.
my home in the context of living in Los Angeles and living in the age of climate impacts. So where my embers accumulate, thinking a lot about gutters and having covered fire resistant gutters, um, fireplaces and maybe not having a fireplace. And if you do, making sure that it has, mesh around the screens and vents, around air intakes, around anywhere that embers might actually be able to get into the home. And often those are put in, for maybe pest control or things like that. There might be a mesh, but often they're not fine enough to keep embers out. So that's a place to look if you are um, looking to prevent fires on your own property, is thinking about the different kinds of screens and vents around. Um,
Hmm.
Another question to think about if you are building from scratch is what your house is made of. So rather than putting wood siding, think about other types of siding, metal siding or fiber cement or stucco, something that might be more fire resistant. Thinking about where you have windows, and if you have a bay window, that you're not creating a space again where uh, embers can accumulate or debris can accumulate. Really thinking about uh, insulation. And again, when we think about insulation and we think about windows, we have other considerations. We're not only designing for fire here. We're also designing for energy efficiency. We're designing for thermal comfort. We want a home that feels good and uses as little energy as possible to keep it comfortable. And so those things actually go together. And there are a lot of really good green building principles woven into the guide and woven into best practice when you think about what your options are there. And the guide goes into pretty good detailed notes. Um, and then the last point I'll take on in terms of inside the building is thinking about building systems. It's really important, again, as I was saying, to think about thermal comfort and energy efficiency. One really important point here is the opportunity to decarbonize. And so when we're thinking about retrofitting, sometimes people are thinking, oh, moving from from a gas uh, heater and other things like that to a heat pump, that might be expensive. But especially if you're building from scratch, uh, putting in a heat pump so that you don't have to put both a heater and an air conditioner can be significantly more economical, and then that will lead to real energy savings over time. And the elimination of the need for natural gas is better from an air quality perspective. It's better for reducing the amount of emissions that can potentially lower the drivers of these massive fires in the first place, which is climate change.
Absolutely. Heather, I want to ask you another question because there's a whole section in the guide on community and it really spoke to me. I want you to talk to us about the guide's recommendations for a trauma-informed approach and also managing fire together. And
Yeah, absolutely. This trauma-informed approach actually evolved. This was thinking that we did following, my experiences in the following the Camp Fire and the Woolsey Fire years ago, and going in and working with different communities and trying to get to, well, how do you want to rebuild? What is your vision for the future? And having a lot of conversations of people needing to just have time to tell their story and
Mhm.
really having a hard time even thinking about what the future looked like and moving beyond. Encountered a lot of anger. We encountered a lot of frustration. And it was really, you know, eye-opening for me, frankly, as a consultant coming in from outside, without having that direct impact and connection, to know what was it that I was seeing, what are the patterns that I'm seeing here, and how do I better communicate and help and support and actually make the intervention process of community engagement and visioning for the future be part of a healing process instead of being a triggering process.
Mm.
And so I worked with David Eisenman from UCLA Center for Public Health and Disasters. He's amazing. He's both a medical doctor and a public health practitioner. And we work together along with Nicole Arrett, who is a sociologist and resilience leader and amazing social scientist at the University of Washington. And we thought through, well, what is a trauma informed approach? What is trauma? And what is a trauma informed approach to in other fields, whether it's, there's some things in architecture that have to do with the design. There's some things in around criminal justice. There's things in public health, but there's really nothing for planners, architects, engineers to help them kind of explain to them what is it that is happening that's different in these conditions, and how do we, as practitioners, better support our communities. So that's where that trauma-informed approach came about, and using it, even whether you're using sort of the framework for designing a formal process or just getting educated around the role of trauma. And I think we all understand a bit more about trauma following, the post-COVID, it's not really post-COVID, but post-lockdown days.
Yep.
I think we have a better vocabulary for those things, but understanding what that means in a fire situation is so traumatizing and it's so intense. I mean, hearing Becky's story, right?
Right.
That direct personal experience. We need to really start there and start with the community. So that's the first piece, and what we found through doing that work is actually a reinforcement of other things that we've observed over the years around resilience, which is that community is, and I said this before, the fundamental building block of resilience. And that goes for building resilience all the time so that you have social cohesion, you have connections in the community, you have the ability to respond, you can bring more resources, you can share resources. It also is about healing. And so having a group and designing a community engagement process to envision what the future could look like in ways that are designed to support that collective healing process can help us overcome a lot of the barriers to building back better and get at some things that maybe you can't do at just the property level. And
Well
so
said. Yes.
yeah. So then
So
we can talk about
important.
that more, but yeah, thank you.
Yes, I mean that's so brilliant. It's not just opening up the high school gym and bringing everybody in to do whatever. There's a real need for the social science component of this to design those interactions well. We're going to take a quick commercial break, but when we come back, we have much more with Becky and Heather. So don't go away, folks. There's more Go Green Radio right after this. Welcome back to Go Green Radio, everybody. So glad that you could join us. If you're just tuning in, let me catch you up. Today, we're talking about a California wildfire rebuilding guide that has just come out from the U.S. Green Building Council California with their partners at Arup. And we have Heather Rosenberg from Arup, and we have Becky Feldman, who's the chief of staff at USGBC California. We're talking about this guide. Becky, before we leave the community section of the guide, I really would love to talk about a couple of concepts. And so, could you talk to us about shared purchasing power? That is so new. I've never thought about doing something like that with my neighbors. Talk to us about that key concept.
Sure. Yeah, we really want to empower not only individuals but communities to think about how they approach the rebuilding process. As Heather's mentioned, there's a lot of advantages to building from the ground up rather than retrofitting, and we can take these better community-wide approaches. So we're talking about community scale energy resilience, for example. Can you have a solar battery connected microgrid that serves your community? Can you think about how you have a resilience hub in your community, which is work that USGBC California, when we were USGBC Los Angeles, did with Boyle Heights to create a resilience center where, in cases of extreme heat and extreme weather, you have a place that you know the lights are going to stay on. There's going to be refrigeration you can come to as a safe hold when these disasters are happening in your community. So how do we look at these things holistically? We're not just looking at buildings holistically, we're looking at communities holistically. How do we work together? Because we really, I think one of the things that can come out of this is better connected, more resilient, and better protected communities that we can all live in together. I think at the end of the day, like, we all want that village concept. We want to be able
Hmm.
to rely on our neighbors, we want to be able to support our neighbors, have relationships with them, and we want to keep each other safe. So how do we do that together? So I'll let Heather dive into some of the more technical aspects of that, but that's what we're really thinking about when we talk about these community concepts.
I love it. And Heather, let's go to you. We talked about, shared purchasing power and shared energy resilience. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, these are some important concepts that are hard to achieve sometimes, and particularly the shared energy resilience. Doing that at a community scale, where we're talking about how can we move towards a more networked approach rather than a centralized grid to our energy distribution, where we have a combination of storage and generation across the community, so that you can disconnect from the larger grid and keep the power on locally without running power through the big infrastructure lines. And so that's something we've been thinking about quite a lot across the state. And it's difficult to do in a built out community. But when you're working together, can you think about connecting to community scale microgrids? That's an opportunity that might emerge here. Can you even think about opportunities to pare back the gas line and not depend on natural gas, which can be highly flammable and has, again, air quality issues with it. So doing that is one opportunity. And we'll keep thinking about what are the other kinds. There's a whole bunch of other things that are emerging we can talk about towards the future of really thinking about land and maintaining fire together, the fire landscape, to create buffer zones and breaks and management. And again, this is something that's not specific to a community that's rebuilding. Thinking about managing fire together, so that even if I'm keeping removing debris and things like that on my own property, making sure that's happening on my neighbor's property also reduces my risk. Making sure
Hmm.
that we're watching out for the people who maybe are elderly, or maybe are not aware, or maybe don't have the means to hire somebody to come in and do maintenance. Can you do it together collectively, share costs, share the sort of administrative burden of anything that involves maintenance is, in our busy lives,
Hmm.
something that can be a headache. How do we do those kinds of things together uh, to 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 create those opportunities to reduce fire, but also build community all the time?
Well, if these climate disasters have taught us nothing, it's that, we are none of us are the Lone Ranger.
Hmm.
We are all in this together. We need each other, and there's some humility in that. That if that concept sinks in, it helps us to engage with our community in new ways that maybe we hadn't thought about before. Becky, I want to pivot to you. I want you to talk to us about the marketplace. How does it work and who should engage in it?
Sure. Yeah, this is sort of phase two of our work here and something we're really excited about because this is going to have a really big impact now, but it's going to live long past this situation and serve many purposes. So we're working with a platform called Building Ease, which we're putting together a rebuilding marketplace. So we will upgrade our guide so that it's a bit more of a digital tool, almost like a click through. So if you're looking at roofing materials and you're like, I do want a metal roof, you can click in and you can see the metal roofing options available through the marketplace. You can place an order directly. You can talk to your contractor about doing this for all the projects that they're working on so they can get a better price because they're ordering metal roofing for 5 homes, 10 homes, 20 homes at a time. Or you can put in a request such as I want metal roofing and I need this amount and this is when I want it delivered and this is the price I want. What manufacturer can get this for me? So there's so many different ways it can be used to aggregate orders so that manufacturers are seeing I have 10 orders that are coming from Altadena. I have 10 orders coming from Pasadena. What bulk do I need to get to in those communities to give them better pricing? How can I align the delivery of those orders? So we're dealing with other logistical challenges. So we're really excited about how this platform will work and what it will provide people. And it will also provide access to some of these newer materials that people weren't previously using because they can be more expensive. But if we can get a volume that makes
Mhm.
it easier for these manufacturers and producers to work with and it's guaranteed, then we can start to bring prices down. We can make these materials more available now and in the future, which is really just a win for everyone. And it's really for homeowners, people rebuilding can go on it directly, but really to work with their general contractors and their building professionals to say, these are the things I've learned about rebuilding for fire and climate resiliency. This is how I want to do it. Can you work with me? How do we work with these materials? How do we find the best vendors and manufacturers? And they can come together on this platform. And there's a really great interface where they can look at all the orders that they have out. They can align when things are being delivered. Because it's not just the actual climate challenges that we're facing in this situation. We're facing a lot of logistical challenge, a lot of potential labor shortages, material shortages. We are going to have to really align efforts to combat those challenges, to make sure that this can happen in a reasonable amount of time, that it can happen equitably, that it can happen in a way that gets everyone back in the communities. It's such a rush to be first, but if you're first, you're living in a community that doesn't have the same resources. Is everything else going to be rebuilt? Or are you going to be living somewhere where the other 30 of your neighbors are still going through this process? So in helping each other and providing things like the marketplace that align these efforts, we can better accomplish these goals. So we're really excited about it and really invite people to participate. We're launching it in a week or two. It will be on our website. It'll be really accessible. You just set up a profile and you can go through and look at the materials there and really start to think about how you're going to rebuild or how you're going to harden for future disasters.
And speaking of future disasters, Becky, how much of this guide is specific to the Los Angeles fires that happened earlier this year? Is this guide just for fire resilience, or could this guide be used to prepare for other climate disasters?
So, yes and yes. It was really developed with these fires in mind. There was an immediate need. This group came together before I was even back in the office. I was out for the rest of January, finding a home for my family, finding a school for my daughter to go to because we had lost her school. We had lost the school she was going to next year. And so I was still collecting myself, and this group was already like, there's an immediate need for this information. Let's get together. So that was definitely the genesis of this guide, but it can be used so far beyond that. These are choices that you can make in any environment that has fire and other climate disasters, as Heather said, like extreme heat. All these same tools apply, this tight building envelope that keeps those temperature controls for you. But this can be used anywhere where there's going to be fire. You can use these strategies. And also, everything in this guide is aligned to Chapter 7A standards. So that's the Cal Fire maps were redrawn to show high fire areas. High fire areas need to build to these 7A codes, but we know that these disasters aren't just going to be limited to these fire zones, not just to flood zones. So I think we really recommend that anyone rebuilding, if you are rebuilding in this Los Angeles fire situation, you lost your home to a fire, you should rebuild to really high fire standards, and that should be the practice moving forward. Some of these resiliency things that Heather talked about, everybody should be doing them because we don't know where the next thing is going to hit and what community is going to be impacted. So the more of these techniques we can use across the board in every community across California and beyond, and we will continue to adapt the information so that it fits for a broader audience. So yes, if you're experiencing this acutely right now in Los Angeles, definitely use this guide. But if you're in some other part of California, if you're in Colorado who's faced wildfires, if you're in New Jersey is just having wildfires, so there's so many applicable uses for this information. It's really for everyone.
That is fantastic. We're going to take a quick commercial break, but when we come back, we have much more to talk about. So don't go away, folks. There's more Go Green Radio right after this. Welcome back to Go Green Radio, everybody. So glad that you could tune in. Heather, I know that before we took a break, you had some more that you would like to say about the parameters of this guide. So go right ahead and share that with us.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to say this is not designed to be the end all be all guide to a resilient home. This is a guide to fire resilience in the context of uh, places like California that also have seismic considerations.
Hmm.
So, for example, you know, we wouldn't recommend here building a concrete bunker to protect you from fire and heat or other things like that, because you really need to think about the fact that this also is earthquake country.
Hmm.
And it's important to understand that because being resilient isn't just one thing. And it is really understanding what are the drivers or what are the things that can be disruptive? What are the hazards that you face in your local area? And I would love to see in the future developing guides like this for other kinds of hazards like flooding, um, layering in extreme heat. Heat is in here. And an important note on heat is when we talk about landscaping, this doesn't mean you have to have concrete barren landscaping because that's
Hmm.
not good for heat. And in fact, we saw that well-watered native landscaping performed really well and actually helped prevent fires. So we really want to think about these things in context.
I thank you for that, Heather. That's some great insight. Heather, one of the questions that I really want to ask revolves around affordable housing because the state, and not just California, but other states as well, really have a lack of affordable housing.
Yeah.
We need more in the coming years. How is this guide helpful for that mission?
Yeah, I think it's a really important question. We're already facing a housing shortage and a housing crisis. We desperately need to build more housing, particularly more affordable and even really middle class or middle income housing across all of our neighborhoods. And so this guide can help. I think one thing that can be really helpful actually is the marketplace, and I'm so excited for USGBC California to be launching that initiative. Building Ease is such a great platform. I was really blown away when I saw it. So that bringing down the cost of materials at scale is really important. But I also think, we're working with a number of communities and organizations to rethink some more fundamental issues around housing of how do you keep benefit within the community and who can own the land? How can you think about zoning? How do you increase some density? Putting in things like ADUs or accessory dwelling units, maybe building back a duplex or other light density touches that can add in more units. We're talking about land trusts that can acquire land and from people who want to leave and think about aggregating and developing for affordable housing in some really creative ways, and land trusts where there's potentially shared ownership and ways to engage with the community, but also try and protect some of that generational wealth that was lost.
Gotcha.
Something I
No,
would love
that's
to jump in and talk about just really quick because it was in
sure.
my mind when Heather was talking about this is in the guide, we reference it. We're going to go more in version 2 into it. But prefabricated and modular housing, that's something that is really promising for this situation and beyond. I lived in a mobile home park, so it's something I'm really familiar with, but a lot of people aren't. And a lot of people think like, oh, trailer homes, less resilient, not great materials, and have these sort of negative approaches to it. But it is a way that we can do this at scale that is more sustainable. It's going to handle some of those logistics and materials issues better, and it's going to get people back into their homes faster. And there are some really innovative, really beautiful modular and prefabricated builders out there. And there's also what I learned about in this process, which is assemblies. It doesn't mean your whole home is prefabricated, but maybe a particular unit or a particular part of your home is factory built, which really eases your process. And this cuts down on time, which is something that everybody is concerned about. So I just want to highlight that we need to think about a lot of things differently. And that's just one of the things that I think I'm excited to see come more to the forefront and be more accessible to people that would have never considered it before.
Well, that's a great point, Becky. And I want to go to you for this question, Becky, because you are in a unique position to give us perspective. But what gives you hope for the challenging recovery process ahead?
Oh, it's something I think about every day because I think maintaining hope and optimism in this situation, especially as someone going through it, which I will say honestly has been really challenging. I face new challenges with this every single day, but it's really knowing that we have the intellectual capital, we have the skill set, and we have all the resources we need here in LA to rebuild these communities as models for what well-built, resilient, well-connected communities can look like. Um, I envision for my neighborhood of Tahitian Terrace that we have solar connected microgrid for shared energy resiliency. So if the power is turned off, we still have power in our neighborhood. We have beautiful shared defensible spaces that are park-like that we can come together as a community. I think there's so many opportunities to re-envision what neighborhoods look like and make them better. We're living in this pre-done era of you have your lawn and your fence and your own private home. But I know for me, I would share my yard if it could be bigger and more defensible and I could meet with my neighbors and it would be a really nice future. So I just really envision how we can make this not exactly what it was, but something better that can really be a model for the communities that unfortunately will face this in the future because this is not slowing down, it is accelerating, and we're going to have to continue to revisit the challenges of rebuilding over and over and over again. So, how can we be a blueprint? How can we use all the advantages we have here in Los Angeles to really do this in a way that is inspiring for everyone?
Oh, I love it. I've got goosebumps. That Angelino spirit, I mean, the folks who are Angelinos, you guys are so strong, so resilient, and I know that you're going to lead the way for the rest of us and give us a great example. Heather, a last question for you. Everybody has a budget these days, and if people are looking at this guide and they can't afford to do it all at once, so they can't afford some of the steps. How do you recommend that they prioritize if they've got to be very, very mindful of their budget, which I don't know anybody who doesn't have to do that.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah. It is a real challenge. I think a lot of people are underinsured, so cost is going to be an issue. But I think coming back to the basics uh, of non-combustible materials, defensible space, making sure that those, we talked about the vents and the gutters and the roof material and those kinds of things are are appropriately designed and maintained, that doesn't have to cost a lot at all. In fact, that can be no cost and can be in some cases cost saving. So I think that piece, and then finding ways to work with your community to do things at scale and share resources, share knowledge, and really focusing on the simple. And again, I'll just lift up Becky's point around the prefab. I think that's such an interesting strategy. I'm seeing prefab models that are local, that they can set up local factories and bring in local fair trade labor and do things fast and be net zero carbon, and fire resistant. There's some really great options out there. So I think thinking about these things at scale will take leadership and coordination, but there are opportunities to do it better and to do it cost effectively and to not forget long-term operating costs and the power of community.
well, thank you for that, Heather, and thank you to you and Becky both for being with us today. This was an amazing conversation based on an amazing resource in this California Wildfire Rebuilding Guide that you've created, and I'm already excited about version 2.0. I know you will continue to share best practices and knowledge as things progress. But thank you so much for being with us today. And I want to thank our listeners for joining in as well. We're going to be here same time, same place next week with more Go Green Radio. And until then, have a wonderful week and do something in your life to go green.